join Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red.
Hello and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast. It didn't go as planned against Fulham at Craven Cottage. In fact, it was more like Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm your host, Greg Oram, along with my fellow Forest fan from across the Atlantic, Richard Spray.
Good left-footed cross, it's 1-0. Well, it is this time, and it's Emil Smith Rowe from close range with the header. It's Calvin Bassey he's got on the end.
The only way is up.
Take from the left-hand side. Oh, yeah! Flashing header near post. To beat Don coming out. Yes! Wood from 1 yard. Taps in. Elanga makes it again.
Hope anybody's not stupid enough to write his own.
Well, you know, I was thinking, what can I do? And all of a sudden I got a WhatsApp from Richard saying, you know, yesterday was a nightmare. So it kind of gave me the idea about Nightmare on Elm Street, and I could rustle something up because it was a little bit like that. But at the same time, not all doom and gloom. So Richard, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. So I guess I'm trying to figure out who's the Freddy Krueger in this scenario. Is it Adama Traore maybe? I don't know. It's interesting. But yeah, that's brilliant. Well done, mate. Yeah. I'm much better today than I was yesterday. Post-match, I think I didn't talk to anybody in my family probably for the remainder of the evening. So I was wearing that too much. I was, letting it affect me too much, unfortunately.
I know.
I'm doing well.
I know they're feeling well. So too relaxed on the Dubai trip. Have Forest been found out, hitting a mid-season blip, or just running out of juice? We celebrate the wins and we certainly mourn the defeats, but we're going to try and stay balanced and offer some perspective in our analysis on yesterday's away defeat at Craven Cottage. So with Richard and I, we have regular contributor, the Statman, Danscape.
I'm a Statman.
Danscape, you've not been very well this week, and you've had a bit of a sore throat. Good to see you back again. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing a lot better than I was on probably Tuesday night was the worst watching the football, to be honest. I felt absolutely terrible watching that FA Cup game, which I was desperate to go to bed, and it was just going on and on and on. So I'm much better than I was then. Unfortunately, the turnaround wasn't quite finished off on Saturday with a win. That would have been a great way to perk things up, but not to be.
Not to be, indeed. If you're watching along, then thank you for joining us. It's just gone 8 o'clock on a Sunday evening. Let us know you're here. We want to say hello, put some shout outs as usual. And for those of you that catch this later on the playback via Apple or Spotify or YouTube and so on, thank you very much for listening as well. We want you to share your thoughts and comments on yesterday's performance at Craven Cottage. So please do get involved in the chat, and we'll try and share some messages throughout today's episode.
Please do go ahead and hit like and subscribe to be sure not to miss any future episodes from Talking Reds.
People will know that we were chuffed to bits to get over 1,000 subscribers. We hit the mark on New Year's Eve, in fact, which was remarkable for us. and we now are on the slog towards 2,000. We want to keep going. So if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, we hope that you will consider doing so. We try and be a little bit different here. We try with balance and sometimes a bit of passion, a few swear words here and there, and plenty of sound bites and mixes and music that you probably haven't got a clue why that's included. But we like to have fun. So strap yourselves in. We're going to talk about Fulham yesterday. Before we do that, Dan and Richard, I thought I'd go to everyone's favourite human zoo, X, Twitter, and see what the natives were saying about yesterday's performance. So a couple of selections. Hannah Forrest says, I'm over the moon not to be getting relegated, but that doesn't excuse how bad we were at Bournemouth and Fulham. If the players put in more effort, we would have got a draw yesterday and not lost so badly to Bournemouth. Also, nearly blew 3 points at home to Southampton. Peter Lawson says, reminder that we're currently third in the Premier League, having been in a relegation battle for the 2 previous seasons and championship hell for a couple of decades before that. Chill out. I think Peter is basically referencing a bit of the meltdown that was taking place across social media. Ian says, need to revert back to a back 4 and get Callum Hudson-Odoi back on the wing. This is what propelled us to where we are. One bad game at Bournemouth has sent Nuno into unnecessary tinkering. And then there's one more as well. Regular contributor from Australia, Scott Terry, posted in the Australia supporters group that he went to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, disappointed with the result. He has slept on it, reviewed the league table this morning. We're still third. Still an incredible position to be in, far exceeding expectations. Keep the faith in Nuno, we trust. So there is a little bit of a meltdown, or has been a little bit of a meltdown going on. But I think by and large, Richard, most people are able to have some perspective on things. So bear that in mind as we're going through the episode, that there are people that are feeling a little bit fragile about yesterday's performance. And there are others that are saying, look, the bigger picture is still in play. So let's go all the way back to team shape and personnel. I was at the game with Orlando and I was stood with Paul Morley and we saw Raf as well. So it was great to be at the game, although the result didn't go our way. It's always different when you're at a match rather than watching it from the television. And so we were kind of swapping messages throughout. And I kind of felt that what I was seeing was pretty much what you guys were seeing as well. So team shape, we thought he might go with the back 3 with Morato coming in. And that's the unchanged lineup, wasn't it, that we had against Brighton. So do you think that that was the right thing? I mean, look, I know we're talking with hindsight. I know we're talking with hindsight. But did we show our hand, possibly, with not playing Morato in the Cup? And did that kind of say to Fulham, yeah, we're going to go back 3. We're going to go unchanged. Did we give Marco Silva a bit of a leg up?
Yeah, probably a little bit. I mean, I don't think Marco Silva's totally clueless to of what he's seen in historically from Nuno, because I think he employed a back 3 quite frequently at Wolves, right? So it's not lost on him how that looks. So I can't completely go, okay, well, you know, we completely put it into their hands and allowed them to dictate and create a plan that we were never going to be able to match or you know, counteract, I guess, for lack of a better word. But I don't know. I mean, I think we can all say maybe the 4-2-3-1 is a bit more. It seems to allow us to have greater success for the most part as a consistent lineup or formation. But at the same time, you could say, well, Brentford, there was a back 3, right? We destroyed Brighton from a back 3 formation as well. And I could see why he'd think, okay, I'm just going to go with what I think is working right now. And I think has the capacity to help me retain that defensive shape, to also have some attacking potential. But you know, it just didn't work out. They just played better than we did. And sometimes you just have to attribute it to that. I know Dan and I have been going back and forth in a good way. And he always has a very level-headed approach to things versus mine, which is a little bit more emotionally charged. And he's like, sometimes just the crosses are better. And the way that they've managed that moment is just better than what we did. And you just have to tip your hat to them and say, great, good job. You know, we move forward. And it's just one of those teams that I think we played 17 matches against them since 2000 and we won 6 of those 17. And so they're just a tough team to play against. But yeah, so I agree with you, Greg. I don't think we don't want to be too hindsight oriented, but we can't just sit there and question everything, you know, now is Nuno tinkering too much, maybe, but I think it's just a team playing better than we did on the day. Sure,
I think so. I mean, what about you, Dan? Do you think that it was just a bad day at the office, the old cliche?
I think there was certainly some disappointing performances in there, considering that some of the players that really could have had an impact have had, that 2-week break. Doesn't seem to have kind of helped. It seems to have hindered. It's particularly, say, Elanga, who was absolutely on fire, has then had the 2 weeks off, and then there was no impact in the game from him. We started okay, didn't we? We had a few little moments where we did some very quick passing and got down the left hand side, but after that, it just fizzled out too much. And I think in terms of shape, it's obvious why you'd stick with the winning team. I think every podcast I watched, every tweet I saw, pretty much everyone said, let's go with the same side. So Nuno just did what everybody else did. But then afterwards, it's obviously, in hindsight, like you say, people can pick it apart and say, oh, he shouldn't have done that. But I think that's what most people would have done. And I also don't know as the formation, it's not like if we turned up with a different formation, like you said, Richard, Marco Silva's not going to be there like, oh my God, what do I do now? He's going to have a plan for both options.
I don't know. That's, to be honest with you, that's what happened to Hertzler, because
his formation was ridiculous, though, wasn't it? Like, it wasn't.
He didn't adapt. I mean, he even said, going back to the Brighton game, he even said, I wasn't expecting Forest to be playing this way, but he had plenty of time to adapt his team, but he didn't. But you make a good point. You're right. Marco Silva's an experienced manager. And I think I've said on the podcast that we have an identity. We play the way we play, and we're not shy about that. So actually, it shouldn't matter, and it hasn't mattered that people know how we're going to approach the game, because we approach the game the way we approach the game, and as simple as that. We're a low possession team, and we play on the counter and try and score the first goal. It just didn't happen yesterday. I was a little bit disappointed right from the off. It just felt like Fulham were more up for it. And that's an easy thing to possibly say when a team doesn't have the ball. So I was trying to remind myself whilst watching at the match, okay, doesn't seem like we're really up for it, but we often concede the possession, and therefore we're going to hold our shape and we're going to allow Fulham to have the ball. Having said that, they were zipping it around. I mean, I think Fulham are actually a good team. I really do think they are a good team with some good players. And seeing Traore live, I'm not sure if it's for the first time. I might have seen him play before, but he really stood out for me yesterday. He was up for it, and there was more to his game yesterday than perhaps I thought he had. And I thought the contest with Williams at times looked like David versus Goliath, because Traore is built like the side of a shit brick house, and we all know that. And so he was bullying and tussling and all that kind of stuff.
It's final ball with him, isn't it? Like, normally you see him play and he'll do everything, and then the final ball's rubbish, and then that first goal, obviously, the exact opposite.
Well, that's it. We had no width, which I felt really hindered us. But just before Richard they scored, there was a warning with Traore crossing in for Jimenez to head, and it just went wide. They all thought, the Fulham fans that thought Jimenez had scored, and it was a let-off. It was a warning. It was, this could get messy. So should we have done more with trying to stop Traore crossing that ball for the Smith Rowe goal?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I think Dan kind of put things in a good order. Basically, in our WhatsApp group, you can kind of look at each level of that, what unfolded there. Nico's playing better instead of lunging at the ball, I think, with his left foot. He puts Traore in a more difficult position to get the ball across. Aina, which is not, again, I'm just saying this in order of how it happened, not in terms of how I see it being, what was more critical versus something else. But I would say that Aina saw Smith Rowe. He had eyes on him. He didn't, whatever his decision-making was, it looked like he released and allowed him to continue to run. And unfortunately, Murado just didn't have good positioning. And we all understand the woes that Murado has had. I think I was looking at it today prior to this match. He had a 25% success rate on aerial duels. And so he's just not, for a guy that big and that with that kind of, advantage from a height standpoint, he just doesn't seem to position himself well for things, particularly when he's trying to defend against a potential goal. But Smith Rowe did a good job. I mean, it was a beautiful cross, as Dan pointed out in our WhatsApp group. It was an excellent quality cross, dipped right over his head, and Smith Rowe was just in a perfect position to put it away. It's unfortunate. I felt like there was a lot of moments there that could have prevented that, but once the ball had been released, it was pretty much over from there, because I just don't think either of our defenders in that moment really put themselves in a position to succeed and prevent it.
I mean, it was a delicious cross, but it was frustrating that it's gone straight onto Smith Rowe's head, Dan.
Yeah.
He's just kind of popped up at the back post. I mean, we'll talk about Sells because he had a great game, obviously. I've looked back on it and I kind of almost think the ball's coming over and Sells must have an eye that the only attacker in sight is Smith Rowe, just there. And I almost want, and it's easy to say, and I'm not being overly critical. I almost want him to kind of come out and jump towards Smith Rowe to try and get a bit of a parry on it, because the ball's only going to go in one direction. But he stays back and he gets beat. But if he comes out and goes towards Smith Rowe, and as Smith Rowe connects with the ball, it's possibly going to be a ball that he gets in the face or something. So is that, could Sells have done more, or am I being a little bit over analytical on that? And are we starting to see the weaknesses in Morato's game as well, do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know with Sells. I didn't really look at it in that way. I suppose afterwards I thought, Sells had a brilliant game at what Sells is brilliant at, those close range shots, but he never really impacts crosses that often, does he? Maybe once a game. And I was thinking afterwards, because there was so much of a threat from crosses, is that because Fulham have identified that, the goalkeeper's not going to get involved, so it's an area where you can get some joy. So maybe I'd have to see it again, I think, to see on that one. Obviously, what you need is just some pressure on Smith Rowe, don't you? Just something, whether it's Aina just sticking with him, or whether it's Morato taking another step back, whether it's Sells coming out, just some kind of pressure so that he might, put it off target or miss-hit it or something. Whereas in the end, it was just a very sweet goal. I mean, I do think the quality of the ball in is what really decides it, as opposed to bad defending, because it is like perfect at pace, right exactly where you want it to be. And Smith Rowe times the run perfectly because it's a late run, which are always the most difficult to pick up if players do them, and if the ball in is good quality. So my initial thought, and I made some kind of noise when he kicked, when he made the cross, I was like, oh, you just knew it was just one of those crosses where you're like, that's the problem, because it's so good. It's so much of a dangerous area. So I think that one is pretty much just a great goal. Whilst we can and another day, you'd maybe think of goalkeeper comes out, Morato just gets an extra 2-3 inches in the air, but I'm pretty much putting that one down as just a great cross.
It was a great cross. Paul Morley was stood next to me in the crowd, and literally as the ball was being lofted over, he's just said out loud, "Too easy." Bosh, in it went. So it was frustrating, and that was on 15 minutes. Smith Rowe grabs the goal. Still plenty of time for us to get back into the game, but I'm watching the first half, Richard, and I'm trying to keep myself balanced. I'm taking myself back to the match now, but I just kind of grew more and more sure that Danilo isn't quite ready yet. And when I mean quite ready, I just feel that match sharpness that we need to really push us forward. I think he's a wonderful player. I think I'm not slating him. I'm not hanging him out to dry. I'm just not sure that Danilo is quite at it yet. Whether that's still him coming back from fitness and match sharpness, or whether he's still not quite putting the foot in when he needs to because he's worried about an injury. But I was also thinking as well about our midfield. I thought that Fulham ran the midfield in that first half, especially. They dominated the midfield. And I thought to myself, we've spoken about Yates as being a perfect player for us in an away game, in a tough away game. And then I thought about Dominguez. And then I remembered we'd lost Sangare and we'd lost Dominguez to injury early in the season. And our midfield really was built on the really good work that both Yates and Dominguez, along with Anderson, as a three in different kind of games, had done. And then I saw this tweet from Lee Millwood, and he put, what's confused me is that the midfield of Yates or Dominguez that's got us to third in the Prem looks to be considered third and fourth choice for that position now. And it kind of hit the nail on my head a little bit, because that's what I was thinking. How can it be that all of a sudden Danilo and Sangare are now pushed into that spot because I think Yates and Dominguez have been really good for us. And I'm not talking about them being perfect. I'm not talking about them being amazing, but we are third in the Premier League. And our midfield and our team has been doing something really good and really right in many different ways. And I just want us to continue down that vein. So is there anything in that for you, Richard? Or do you think, look, Danilo and Sangare were the starters and have to be the starters. They're back now, and we're going to be playing in a slightly different way.
Yeah, it's a difficult decision, I think, for Nuno, because you've got, in one sense, the consistency, and there's certainly been matches where Dominguez hasn't played well. He didn't play well against Bournemouth. And he's got a lot of good qualities, but he's also got limitations as well. And then, I know he's trying to weave in and give playing time to Sangare and to Danilo. We've all acknowledged the Premier League is not really a gimme game in this league, even though there's some teams that are clearly at really poor form at the bottom of the table. So how do you find ways to get those guys involved so that they can get match fit, so they can get some acumen and some acuity level back to try to be a value? Because everything coming in from a Sangare standpoint, from a Danilo standpoint, and what we've seen from Danilo, he can be a very creative player, but he can also defend pretty well. But to your point, I think Lewis talked about it on Forest Focus, and he brought it even going back a couple episodes prior to that. He was being very prophetic about the fact that there's just this adrenaline moment that gets you excited because you're finally back and you're ready to play and you're excited to play. And that seems to have dissipated into more of a concern over his physical well-being, right? Internally is what I'm talking about. And so it's like, how do we ever get to the point where we feel like Sangare can progress and he can be the player that we thought he was going to be if he's not on the pitch? And so it is a difficult thing for Nuno to negotiate. But I do agree with you. That just felt like a match. I think we discussed that a little bit on the preview match. Was this felt like something that was tailor made for a Yates, because where you want him to operate is to disrupt the middle of the pitch as well as provide where he can coverage, on either side. On that way, that edge play that we know that they did very successfully. And I mean, Sandro Berger and Lukic were great yesterday. They just kept everything flowing, right? There was very little time where they stopped and they passed it back side to side. I mean, they were getting everything moving forward on those wings, and then they were just pelting us with crosses on the ground and the air. And so they clearly had an approach that we just weren't ready for and didn't execute to mitigate. But yeah, I don't know. I could see the challenge from Nuno's perspective, but at the same time, I do agree with you. I think maybe it's time to just focus in on finding isolated moments to weave them in and not rely on them to be what we think they can be right away. There needs to be a little bit more of a sort of a phasing in plan versus just throwing them in there and assuming they're gonna thrive when those other two guys have played so well and provided that needed support and coverage to us up until when they came back.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that those kind of games, to weave them back in, are home to Brighton and home games coming up. Away at Fulham, especially when you're taking Danilo off on 63 minutes, Danscape, and you're bringing Sangare on for him. It's again, I just thought it was an interesting change. I don't think that Sangare was able to really impact the game when he came on. And again, this isn't me saying he's a bad player and we should never play him. I was just a bit perplexed that he was the one that was coming on. And Damon there says, I think Danilo and Sangare are potentially more progressive. That's possibly true, but I just don't think I saw it yesterday. And maybe an away game at Fulham, Dan, is where you're not going to see it.
I think there were some parts from Danilo which I think showed why he was in the team. I think he passed the ball forward. First thought was forward a few times, and he was sort of involved in our goal as well in terms of just a quick bit of link up with Gibbs White. So I think there were a few times when he's just got that little bit of vision that the other players don't have for a quick forward pass, and I think that's why he's in the team. Particularly away, I suppose the opposite side of that is if you're going away, you're not going to have the possession, and you are playing as a counter-attacking side. His ability on the ball from deep to ping those sort of long through balls very quickly that Yates just would not do, and that Dominguez very rarely does, I think. But, I think that's perhaps why he's in the side, and ultimately Nuno's seeing the best Danilo in the team is probably a better player. So he's trying to get him to that point, because I guess kind of like Richard said, how do you get to the point of trusting them if they're not playing some minutes in the team and getting the minutes up as you go? And again, on the back of Brighton, what a performance from the team. So why would you change it? Why would you suddenly doubt Danilo? Because I think most people after that were saying it's good to have him in the team because he'll play the forward pass when Yates wouldn't, and so on. So it's just an impossible choice when you've got four good players, quality players that can do different jobs, there's always going to be, I think, a hindsight of saying, well, actually, this guy better. I mean, we're not onto their second goal, but Yates defending on that corner versus Danilo's defending on that corner probably could stop their second goal. So, you've instantly got to change there, but you lose the ability on the ball.
We will get to that shortly, but let's just go through our goal, because it did come out of nothing. I felt we didn't look like scoring, and we hadn't really seen many kind of close counter attackings where we're in our groove and we're firing on a few cylinders here. So it did come out of nothing, Richard. Morgan Gibbs-White gets the assist. It was a progressive forward ball into their box. Chris Woods gets a bit of a lucky touch on it. It takes him away from the defender, stops it, turns and hits, and obviously couldn't see in the ground so much, but on replay gets that glance off Calvin Bassey, which probably makes a difference and sends it past Bern Leno. So just sum up your thoughts on the Wood goal, and was that really the point when Forest needed to make sure that they weren't going to lose the game?
I would think so, because I think that you pointed it out. They were lucky to, I think, even be in that position to have that happen, because ultimately, I mean, as Dan pointed out, it was a nice play by Morgan Gibbs-White. I mean, he just stuck his foot out and got it to Danilo, who got it back to him, who immediately then did a very Morgan-esque thing, right, which is pelting it like that with a nice curl. But the way it landed, I mean, that was, I hate to put it in these terms because I don't want to diminish the value of scoring, but it seemed a bit lucky. And I think you referenced that in terms of the touch that came off Wood's leg. I don't think that was intentional whatsoever. I think his ability to hold the ball up and turn and try to take the shot was very well done. But as you pointed out, a lot of that elements, and it felt like, okay, if you get a little bit of luck there, now it's time to bet in. Now it's time to really play with a higher level of sort of mental sort of awareness and really lock in. And to a degree that sort of happened, but then the beginning of the second half, it was just the same. It just was wash, rinse, repeat. They started coming in and started pressing, and they started to dominate a little bit. And as Dan pointed out, we lacked a little bit of height in that front post to try to prevent Jimenez. And it was interesting because I'm getting into the second goal. I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, but yeah, I was very excited. I literally leapt out of my couch and scared the living out of my wife, who was sitting right next to me. But I felt like, okay, now we got some momentum. Now we got some positivity. Let's take advantage of that. And it just didn't seem like that really occurred. It just sort of felt like we sort of started to step back again and got comfortable, and it just never was. There wasn't ever any real threat moving forward.
Once Wood scored, it was only in. I mean, he scored on the 37th minute. It was only in like the 5 minutes after that you really saw a change in Forest's whole kind of aura on the pitch. The zip and the energy just went up 2 or 3 levels, and I thought, okay, that's given us a kick up the backside.
Yeah.
But most importantly, if we can't get a second goal before half time, let's just make sure that we don't concede. And we went in at 1-1 down at half time, and I was feeling, okay, 1-1 against Fulham. I'll take the point now all day long. Let's get a point and get out of here. And so I guess the question I've got for you is, should Nuno really have thought about making a change at half time? Because we know that he's done it before. Even though we scored, it's a lucky goal. The 3 at the back on this particular game wasn't working. Our lack of width was a problem. Should he have taken, do you think, the opportunity to make a change at half time? Or do you think he was still being very cautious to hold out for a point?
No, I think he should have made the change. I think most people felt like that. My brother certainly texted at some point to say, look, we need to go to a 4 here and have a different shape. I think everybody watching just felt like the wide players were getting too much joy. And I think that's because of the setup with the wing backs were trying to play chicken with them and sort of get behind them and push them back. But it wasn't working because Traore was just managing to get one-on-one with Williams and get too much time to impact the game. So I think if we go to the back 4, your fullbacks sit back, you can at least deal with each threat at each part of the pitch and not have to try and cover the full length of the pitch. So I think he probably should have done it. I didn't sort of mind our response after their goal and the fact that we were not too gung-ho, because that's what we did against Bournemouth. Is we we tried to get back into it too quickly, and we're like, oh right, we're a goal down, we'll push forward a bit, and then we end up 2 goals down. So I thought we'd managed the game okay until half time, just to keep it kind of like, right, quiet, we're still in our sort of position. And I suppose, look, as you look onto the second goal and everything, at the end of the day, they've scored 2 headers. They haven't ended up scoring and cutting us open a lot, but yes, they were the dominant team, and we never got a foothold in it in that second half. And I think the switch in formation would have definitely helped.
We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back after the Cheese Trader to chat more about Forest's defeat at Fulham yesterday.
The Cheese Trader, based on Grape Lane in York, is a cheese lover's paradise. Home to some wonderful specialty cheeses, relishes and chutneys, and also with a fantastic street food menu. Try their loaded fries or posh cheese on toast. It'll be the best you've ever had. Owned by Forest fan Stu Freestone, the Cheese Trader proudly sponsors Talking Reds. Quote Talking Reds every time to get 10% off your order. The Cheese Trader and Talking Reds, the perfect cheesy mix.
The perfect cheesy mix indeed. 10% off every time you quote Talking Reds. Right, so it's 1-1. We're into the second half. We haven't made the change. We're still sticking with 3 at the back, Richard. But the alarm bells are kind of ringing a little bit. You kind of alluded to it a moment ago. So I'll come back to you again to carry on what you wanted to say about the second goal. Because on the 62nd minute, the ball comes over. It's Calvin Bassey, who I struggle to rate as a player, although he is a good player, but I still struggle to. I don't think I really like him very much. I kind of feel that there's not much to him as a player, but I think I'm probably being a bit harsh. And then he pops up with the goal that wins in the game. So take us through the kind of minutes surrounding that goal and the warning signs that were surely there for us.
Yeah, and just real quick, I mean, you saw this a couple of different times where there was things that Fulham were doing that didn't work the first time, and then they came back to it. So there was a corner that they had previous to that in the 54th minute, and Morato actually defended the near post really well, and the zonal marking on that play actually worked because they made it difficult for them to make runs. Like Jimenez was trying to move around, but he kind of got caught up and sort of impeded, and that's a good thing. But then the second go around, he did a better job of positioning himself a little bit further to the right, and then he made sure to isolate himself on Danilo, and he just, to our point, Danilo's just not in the right headspace right now to be probably engaging players aerially or on the ground as well as he probably would. And it was a perfect play. I think, Dan, you and I were chatting in the WhatsApp. It's like the way that they structured that set piece play was very well done and very well executed. Flicked it back. I think my only complaint was, again, there was some hesitancy, and you know, I'm going back through some of the highlights to look at Ina's play because I love him as a footballer, as a person, obviously, you know, but he looked like he hesitated again and didn't really engage. Like he just sort of like sat back. I mean, the header was coming right over, and it's hard sometimes to maybe go cycling through all these decisions in your mind in that split second. But he just didn't look like he kind of stopped back like this, and then Bassey just headed it in. Could Sells maybe have done a little bit better on that? Maybe. I mean, he wasn't too far away from it, but it just felt like we just handed it to him. And so that it was a little bit disappointing again, but you know, just a well executed footballing play. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we just didn't manage the moment the way that they did, and we can only complain about that so much. The game's over. We lost. You know, we have to move on. But at the same time, I felt like it wasn't a usual sort of Ina-esque moment. It felt like we didn't, as Dan pointed out, if it had been a different player, potentially like a Yates, maybe that the outcome's different. But hindsight again, which seems to be the theme today. But yeah, I was just disappointed that we didn't seem to give maximum effort on that play, and didn't seem to play heady football. So it's disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, what's happened to us, Dan, at set pieces? I haven't got the figures in front of me, so I'm going off the top of my head. But first 19 games of the season, at the halfway mark, we have conceded, I think, at that point, maybe 1 from a corner, and maybe 2 from a set piece overall, or something like that. Since we've come into the new year and we started playing the second round of fixtures, if you like, that I think we've conceded from corners 2 or 3 times now, or something like that. It feels like what has been a real strength for us this season where it was a real bad weakness before. There's just one or two kind of lackadaisical moments coming back in again. Why do you think that is?
I think it's probably more to do with the opposition having seen what our setup is and what our strength is now, because I think that Fulham corner is a good corner because it obviously avoids the strongest part of our defence, which is that 6-yard box. That's where we put Murillo and Milenkovic. And there was a few headers again in that game yesterday where I thought Murillo did a really well in the centre to get a couple of big headers out. And I think they just thought, well, what's the point of putting the ball into that area? Let's go near post, which is what we saw Southampton do as well. If you go near post, it gives obviously less time to react. And obviously, if you can win that first contact and divert the ball across that dangerous area, then people aren't set in their position like they are when you're taking the kick the first time, which is obviously what happens with like Aina. You get that space between players and you get just obviously, I think a lot of footballers always say it's always more advantageous at that point. If you're the attacker going towards goal, everything's in your favour. You can see the ball, you can see the players. If you're the defender looking away, you're sort of looking over your shoulder, you're not sure where it is. And I think in this particular instance, I think teams are, like I say, avoiding what is our strength, our little brick wall that we've built in the 6-yard box. And it comes down then to the zonal guys to win their battle. And at the end of the day, Danilo did not win that battle, and I don't think he's just not a good aerial defender, header of the ball. He sort of never has been. I don't think that's just to do with his current return from injury. I think these are the compromises you sometimes make with players, aren't they? You can have a guy who's better at defending set pieces, not as good on the ball, or vice versa, and you're always going to have to make those decisions and just hope on the day that people win their duels.
Yeah, Friar Tuck in the comments says he thinks it's time to go back to our successful 4 at the back formula with Dominguez in midfield and Hudson-Odoi out wide. He says he's sorry, but Danilo and Sangare are now squad players on the bench for him. I'm not quite sure I'm all the way on that. I agree to a certain extent. I'm still not sold on Sangare. I just don't trust him. I just don't think that for whatever reason it's ever going to work out for him properly at Forest. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that he just kicks on and we see the player that we hoped we'd signed. And I know there's been various reasons as to why it hasn't worked out for him yet at Forest, with injuries and with malaria and with weight loss and with AFCON and so on and so on. But sometimes for a variation of reasons, a player and a club just don't work out. And I just fear that with Sangare, that may well be the way it turns out. Like I said, I hope I'm wrong. I would love nothing more than for him to just turn in some stellar performances that make us all sit up and throw our hands in the air. With Danilo, there's definitely a player there. I think we're definitely going to see him in some good moments, like against Brighton with that progressive pass forward. There's that word again, progressive, that I think everyone's throwing in all the time now. That pass forward, it's like a buzzword all of a sudden. But I think there's still some elements to his game that need work, and his fitness and maybe his mentality needs to be strengthened, because obviously he had a really bad break on that open game of the season. You can understand that he might be feeling a little bit hesitant in challenges and so on. But the second goal for Fulham goes in on the 62nd minute. Danilo's off, Sangare's on. And at that point, I'm thinking, Richard, right, we need to get into the 4-2-3-1 straight away. It took about 5 minutes, but eventually Morato did go off for Hudson-Odoi. And all of a sudden, we just looked so much better. Again, we just looked like we were back in the game, back into trying to have an influence on the game. Hudson-Odoi rarely gives the ball away. We had width. We had Williams linking up with Callum Hudson-Odoi quite well on that side. There was a lot more play going down our left in the kind of forward areas. But was it too little too late, do you think?
It certainly didn't seem that way. We were 1 goal down with 20. I mean, it's going to be more than 30 minutes with stoppage time, right? So it felt like we had the ability to kind of regroup and get things moving in our favor. And you're right. I mean, you saw the difference that Callum makes. I mean, his ability to the tidiness on the ball, his ability to get the ball back into the middle so that we can survey and try to get a good ball into the box. And because the first half our execution for the final third was just terrible most of the time. If we got across over, there was nobody on the end of it. So it's just kind of like, how do we go about getting that to happen more consistently? And he's a great person to have that happen. And it also, I think, allows Nico to do the best of what he does. And there was plenty of moments where he was inverting and or overlapping depending on the situation, and he did it, I think, effectively. It's just unfortunate that the only opportunity that really came was the one where Callum himself got that perfect ball. I think it was from Ina? I think he got into the middle and he moved and he passed it over to him, and it was in a perfect spot for a classic Callum moment. And instead of like kind of curling it with some height to it over into that corner, kind of i.e. what he did against Burnley, he put it right at Beto. And so it was just, I don't know. It's unfortunate. And I not Beto. What's the goalie's name for Leno? Excuse me, Leno.
Kind of amalgamated.
Yeah, those words there.
Right.
But Leno, yeah, I mean, just went straight at him, and it was just, I mean, that was pretty much it. I don't recall much of anything else in terms of our ability. We certainly had a lot of possession. I mean, I think we were at 57% possession in the second half, and we kind of dominated things once that 4-2-3-1 came into the picture. It just never seemed to get across the line, literally and figuratively. You know, we just could not seem to find that right pass or that right ball, that right cross to kind of get on the end of. So, you know, but so from that standpoint, maybe it's not too little too late. It's just one more example of just lack of execution from an offensive standpoint this time.
That when it comes to Morgan Gibbs-White, he's been getting some pelters on everyone's favorite social media zoo, but that is X and Twitter. And, you know, he had moments in the game, very few moments. It was a quieter game. My opinion is, and I don't know if this is right or not, my opinion is that he has less effective games when we play with a back three. I'm not saying that he's not effective in those games, because when we have played with a back three, he has had moments where he's been super effective. Brighton is the prime example of that. But I also feel that he thrives on when we have wide options. It feels to me like he's better when he's got Callum and Anthony Elanga running down the flanks, and when he's got Wood looking to win it link up. That front four for him, it feels to me, is when he's at his best. Do you think there's anything in that? And do you think maybe, you know, if Morgan's not having a good game, then it affects the whole team, basically?
I definitely agree with the last statement. I think it was interesting. At times, it felt like him and Anderson were both playing in a sort of an advanced midfield role, and he was actually dropping quite deep, I thought, Gibbs-White at times, to pick up the ball or to do a defensive bit of work, which left us even sort of less of an outlet on the few times we did get the ball. Yeah, I just think the setup was wrong overall. It doesn't allow Gibbs-White to really get in the game enough. I think because he's having to potentially go and deal with a wide threat, because before the game, everybody, you know, knew that the threat was Robinson and the wide player Iwobi on that side, or it was Traore as a wide player. And effectively, by going with the three at the back, you're sort of leaving that as 1-on-1 almost, 2-on-1 for in their advantage in the wide areas. So then one of your midfielders has to go over, someone else has to drop in and fill the space and stuff. It just felt like it was never going to allow him to get in the game. And maybe that's why, yeah, when we play that formation, sometimes he's having to do, I think that's it. He has to do his defensive work away from the part of the pitch that he's a danger in. And it's too much distance for him to get from the defending role to then transition into the attacking role. And he's not there where we need him for the outlet to then set us up. Whereas when we play the 4-2-3-1, he's always in the place where we need him to be, so that we can get the ball to him and he can then create something for us. So I think that's probably it. He has to disappear from his sort of main area of the pitch to go and help out defensively. So yeah, he did. I was definitely a point where I was going to message and say, look, he's kind of disappeared. I don't know where Gibbs-White is in this game. He's vanished, along with a couple of others in the second half. And I think just quickly stats wise, I mean, the stats aren't out for some reason on FB Ref. The guys need to get to work. But it looks like this game is the most shots we've had against us all season in a game. This is just to sort of benchmark that this performance really was below par for us. I think 10 shots on target, which is the same as we had at Bournemouth away, which is the joint 2 most shots on target against us as well. Sells had to make the most saves. I think 4th worst in terms of kind of XG we created. and the third highest XG against us. So, you know, it just was a bad performance. Like, it's not necessarily one that you have to extend to being a meltdown, but it was not one we were ever really in with a shout of in that second half.
No, I think you're right. And I think that we've got the identity that I spoke about, the way we play. But our last 2 away games, Fulham and Bournemouth, we've come away with defeats. We haven't had the kind of joy on the counter that we've had in many other games. I will say yesterday, I thought Anderson looked lively-ish. I thought in the first half, he was the one that was trying to make things happen without being spectacular. I thought Ola Aina had another one of the games where he was quite ineffective. I still think he's a wonderful player. We'll talk about Aina again in just a moment. But the one player that I will say that we should also discuss maybe a bit more is Matt Sells. I mean, we had that possession in the second half, but they had the chances to make it 5-1. I mean, literally, we didn't really nearly score, apart from the Callum shot that you just mentioned that Leno had all day long. But they, on the counter, if you like, against us, had several chances to make it 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, Richard. And so we have to look to Matt Sells again for being the keeper he's turned into this season. And surely now making that goalkeeper position in the Premier League team of the season, I reckon. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, as Dan pointed out, and they said this on the broadcast too here in the States, they said he's got to be one of the best shot stoppers in the league. I mean, it's just the things that he can do from that standpoint are excellent. The problem with this match was he wasn't doing the things that we need him to do, which is attacking the ball on set pieces and when crosses are coming in when he has the opportunity to do that, because he certainly has enough athleticism to do that. I don't think it's an issue with his having physical limitations. I think it's just for whatever reason that's just not part of his game. But I agree with you. I mean, there was that series there where I'm trying to remember exactly when it was, but there was a shot, I think, from Traore maybe, and he kind of parried it out. Then an immediate shot that came in from Smith Rowe that he saved that one. And so it was just, his reaction is incredible in those kinds of moments. And to your point, I think had he not been there, I think he ended up with having to make 8 saves through the course of the match, and they had to make 0. So it was a typical Sells performance that we've gotten used to. And we certainly are grateful. I mean, in terms of how he scored as one of the highest rated players on our team for that match. And it was evidenced. I think he probably was the best player that we had, unfortunately and fortunately, on the pitch. So, yeah, I mean, we've talked about him quite a bit. I think we've all agreed at this point we're not worried about that position as much as we were in the past. Now we're actually probably shifting our focus to, okay, do we have issues with not so much depth when we need to close the match out in the midfield and forward areas, but maybe do we have enough bite off the bench and enough sort of attacking prowess off the bench? Because Callum provided that, and you could see when he had to be in that position to come off the bench, it was advantageous for us, but we don't want that. We want him on the pitch starting. So I think, when we start to shift towards the offseason, I know we're a long way away from that. Maybe our mindsets are more about depth in areas to have a little bit more to offer when we get into a point where we need attacking moments off that bench. So, yeah, but I thought he was brilliant. I thought he kept us in the match. He certainly did.
You just kind of reminded me of something I wanted to discuss with you guys. Now, I'll come to that in just a moment, but just quickly, Gordon in the comments says, "Hi chaps, my one and final comment: can Dan please take down that picture behind him and swap with his personal favorite, Thomas Lahm?" I'm not quite sure we can do that. Thomas Lahm,
can't compare.
I'm not quite sure
can't compare the two.
Yeah, I can't compare. Arctic Fox has switched over from FFTV that have just finished. He's here with looking for some more content. Thanks for joining us, Arctic Fox. So what you said then, Richard, that made me think of a point I was mulling over earlier. No one ever imagined we were going to be in the position we're in, third in the table, right? So when we were signing players in the summer, we were signing players to try and make us stronger, to try and make us better, obviously. But I think if everyone's honest with themselves, it was, if we can be better, that's going to probably be a mid-table better, isn't it? That's going to be pretty much where we're probably going to get to. Better than 17th is maybe 15th or maybe at best 12th, like we predicted. So therefore, you're kind of looking at the players you bought in. And so your Sosas and your Jotas, they're the kind of players that you have on your bench when you're possibly a mid-table team. They're good players to come off on the bench. You know, we're going to lose games, we're going to draw games, we're going to win the odd game. Obviously, it's gone a lot better than we thought. So therefore, now in the position we're in, our bench all of a sudden doesn't match up to our first team, because our first team have been exceeding expectations, but we still got a mid-table bench. Our mid-table bench have had moments of being good for us, like Sosa away at Brighton and so on. But effectively, our bench is still a mid-table bench. And Forest, when it comes down to the end of the season, if things don't go well in the games ahead, we could end up slipping down further to where we want to end up. But at the moment, we are a top 3 side. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that level of perspective needs to come into play, doesn't it? Do you think, Dan? Where we say, look, we're in the top 3 and we've been in the top 4 now for a bloody good while. We've just lost our 6th game of the season away at Fulham. We've lost 4 away games, 2 at home. We're coming into a tricky period. But hey, guys, listen, no matter what happens or where we end up, this has still been an astonishingly good season, right? Am I right? Or
massively? This is where this is where it gets tough, isn't it? This is where the mentality comes in, because we're so close to what is an unbelievable season that you start to feel like every game is like, oh, it's slipping away because we've lost one game. But this is where you've got to switch your mentality, isn't it? Of just like, well, look, every win is a step closer to that, and it's not about us going unbeaten now for the rest of the season. That's just completely unrealistic. It's just about getting enough points to finish off the season, as much momentum as we possibly can. And in terms of the players coming off the bench and those players like Sosa and Jota, I mean, they have contributed to this season already, like you touched on. The Brighton goal was key. Jota's winning that penalty against Ipswich, which was the 1-0 win at Ipswich, that is a key part of this season. So they have had an impact, and getting yourself top attacking talent that's just going to start on the bench is like impossible for most clubs in the Premier League, and very hard for us where we were at the start of this season. So it's just the reality of where we started. And I think Nuno's managed to get impact from those players a lot of the time. It would be lovely to have, like we said, that bit more pace on the bench to really scare a team. That's the bit that's perhaps missing. And not having Taiwo on the bench was another lack of an option yesterday. I think Sosa, having played 150 minutes or whatever it was in the Cup, we played that full game, didn't he? That doesn't help, because he's then not really an option to come on, is he, in this game? So there was a few things that conspired against us being able to have that impact. But in terms of the overall picture of the season, like I say, we can't sort of have a meltdown now, because there's 13 games still to go and everything's still to play for.
And we don't do things by halves. I mean, when we got promoted, it was out of nowhere. I mean, we should not have been promoted. We were bottom of the table with a team that just far exceeded everything that we ever thought it could do when Cooper came in. And this season has almost been some of that. We said at the start of the season we thought we'd have a better season than many predicted. And we did our predictions and we put us at 12th on average, and we've exceeded that. So I guess the question to you guys is, to both of you, we go into Newcastle away next Sunday, and then we've got Arsenal and Man City at home. We always knew that these 4 games, if I bring the Fulham game into it as well, were going to be really tough. And so what kind of points, Richard, out of the next 3, we haven't got any from Fulham, obviously, what kind of points from the next 3 is going to be respectable for us? I mean, because it could be anything. It could be no points. It could be 9 points, really. What do you reckon? What's going to be respectable for us out of the next 3?
I mean, I think 4 to 6 to me is the sweet spot. I don't think you should go any lower than that, because there's opportunities, because we play Ipswich, right? So we should be able to beat them. That is also an away match, if I'm not mistaken, right? So we need to...
I'm talking Newcastle, Arsenal.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Newcastle, Arsenal, and Man City.
Okay. I was like, are those in three consecutive?
The next 3 are Newcastle, Arsenal, and Man City.
The next 3 are Newcastle, Arsenal, and Ipswich.
Yeah.
City is after it. Yeah. Okay. So those bigger teams. Yeah, Ipswich is in between. Between Arsenal and Man City. But either way, I think of those 3 matches, getting 4 points out of those 3 matches to me would be fantastic, because we lost to all 3 of those teams early in the season. we've got at least, I think Arsenal and Man City are at home, right? And then we go to Newcastle. They're kind of a weird team right now too. So they're kind of in a weird sort of undulation of form. But I think we have to get a point out of that, because what we need to do is get back to some improvements on the away form. You talked about it earlier. The one anomalous element of our this season compared to previous seasons is how well we've been away from the City Ground, to the point at which we were wondering why are we not winning at the City Ground, but we seem to be able to win away. So that to me is it's a momentum thing, right? It's getting ourselves back into an appropriate sort of trajectory that we want, which is to be more successful in that sort of environment. I hope to see Yates in the next match, because I think that's, again, a perfect place for him to end up playing in that match, to provide that stability and that sort of that aggressor and that disruptor. But yeah, if it was against those three teams that you mentioned, maybe not in consecutive week by week order.
Just to clarify, I do beg your pardon, but it is Newcastle away next, then it is Arsenal at home, and then it is Man City at home. The Ipswich game is after Man City.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you.
Just to clarify for everyone listening and watching, just so we don't get confused, Newcastle away next Sunday, and then the evening game at the City Ground under the lights against Arsenal on the 25th. And then on the 8th of March, we are at home on Saturday against Manchester City. Then the following Saturday, the 15th, we're away at Ipswich. So the next
I think getting 4 points out of those would be a great way to be. Because I think Man City is really ascending again. Because, I mean, they didn't have a great cup tie, but, Marmouche is coming into form. Yeah, so it's a bit.
They win yesterday, didn't they? So, what about you, Dan? Where are you at points wise? Next three.
Before this run of 4 games, all I wanted was to win one of the 4, and I'm sort of assuming that we won't lose both of the home games. We'll be able to get a point at least from one of those 2 home games. So if we can just win one of the 4 and get a point from one of the home games as well, if you like, then 4 points. But for me, it was just getting that one win, and I suppose the biggest thing with these games is that they are the teams that are just below us. So every result is kind of a 6-pointer, not in terms of being that serious like it has in the past for us, but in terms of if we can hold Newcastle to a draw, it just keeps them at arm's length. If they beat us, it obviously nudges them right back up on our tail. And kind of the same with Man City and Arsenal. So, well, not Arsenal, they're obviously ahead of us by a little way now. So it's almost like, would a draw against Newcastle and Man City be quite a good result, just because it keeps that little gap as well? It doesn't give them the 3 points to edge and take another spot of Champions League football away from us. So there's another consideration. But yeah, I just wanted one win from these 4, basically.
I think the thing everyone listening and watching is, from my point of view, if we drop out the top 4 and the top 5, then so be it. None of us ever expected to be there. It would be a dream for us to go into the Champions League. Although, again, be careful what you wish for, because going into the Champions League with the current squad we've got, you're going to probably see a massive overhaul in the summer again, because you're going to need to bring in another level of player. It may just be about right that we end up in the Conference League out of all 3 competitions. It may just be that that's the right thing for us. And if that is the right thing for us, bloody hell, a European endeavour, it would be amazing next season, no matter where it is. So, nothing can take away what a positive season it's been. Nuno's been positive. All the good things we've said about Ola Aina off the pitch, all the good things that we've said about other players, Milenkovic and Murillo, none of that has been, taken away. None of that has been diluted. We just have to make sure that we don't let the wheels come off completely, because it would be the most Forest thing of Forest things to lose the next 3 or 4, and all of a sudden then we are really up against it. Right, we're on the hour. We've gone to the point where we're going to wrap things up. Just very quickly before we do that, I want to say that Forest women drew 1-1 at home today at the City Ground against second place Wolves. They did go 1-0 up with a Mel Johnston goal in the first half. They were pegged back and it finished 1-1. So the Forest women still sit top of their division, and Wolves, who were the second place team, obviously remain, I think, 3 points behind or something like that. Ola Aina and his contract. Now, I popped out a tweet yesterday that got a bit of traction. I've been watching Sky Sports News in the morning, and their presenter said, Ola Aina's had an interview, and he's pretty much said that he sees his future at Forest. And I saw the clip that said, I'm very happy here and I hope to stay here for this and that. And so, yeah, I put out, look, it looks like it's all but done. And I think it's easy to read too much into things sometimes. But my view is that Ola Aina wants to stay at Forest. I don't think he's had his head turned. One or two are saying his performances lately have been a little bit, less than they have been. Has he perhaps been thinking about a move away? Just before we wrap up, just quickly, Dan, on Aina, do you expect him to sign? He seems to me like the kind of honest chap. And again, I don't know Ola Aina, but you get a feel for someone with the things that they say and the way they behave. I kind of feel that he's not going to sit there in an interview and say, I'm really happy here at the club and I want to stay here for years to come, if he doesn't actually think and mean that. And the club have already said that they want him to sign, and Nuno feels confident. Have you got anything else that you think to it, or are you just trying to? Are you trying to keep my feet on the ground?
I'm trying to keep your feet on the ground. I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I think a player saying that they hope so, for me, is them distancing themselves from the decision, almost like, well, I've told the club what I want. If they give me what I want, then yeah. If not, I've got this other offer here. I mean, that's it could be interpreted that way as much as it could the way that we want it to be, because we do want him to stay. And I thought it was interesting in the interview that he said, because he said he's a Chelsea fan. He was at Chelsea. He was getting those games at Chelsea, but he knew he had to go to another club to better his career. So he's kind of prepared to put the emotional side of it aside for his career. And that stuck in my head as well. So it's like he's made those decisions in the past. He could have just stayed at Chelsea as a Chelsea fan and loved it, but he didn't. So I don't know. I hope he stays. I think he's prepared to stay, but I think there's obviously another offer that he wants us to match, is what I would perhaps have in my conclusion from that.
What about you, Richard?
Yeah, it's one of those decisions that I think you don't qualify as good or bad. It's probably good or better. It depends on which one he sees as better. I mean, potentially, as Dan just alluded to, there's something different about his body language. I know he does the videos and everything, but on the pitch, there seems to be a weird sort of dynamic going on. Again, I'm getting too psychoanalytical here, which I don't have the clinical or the experience background to explain any of that. But I just think in terms of observationally, I know we've talked about it in the chat. Sometimes he doesn't seem to really get with the boys when they score and seem as elated and excited. Who knows? Life can be so challenging, and you never know what's going on in people's lives off the pitch to know. But I would say that also I've seen enough in American football to see plenty of players who are in that weird sort of nexus space in terms of contract negotiations where it does become difficult, and it's not impossible to let that affect your performance and just how you see things. But Dan's right. I mean, I so long said one of the best January transfer window moves we could make is to sign him, because we knew once we got past that date, his agent can start talking to other teams. There's nothing that prevents him from doing that, from that happening. So it is going to be difficult because you just don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And clearly they're not going to say anything, but how much of that is just them trying to, jockey for position to improve the contract situation. But as Dan pointed out, if he knows what he wants, he's told Forrest what he wants, and they haven't reciprocated yet. Maybe it's more about, do they really think I'm in the future? Right? Do they really believe I'm worth the things that I'm saying I'm worth given my performance level? So it'll all play out the way it's supposed to play out, I'm sure, but it would be disappointing because clearly what he offers is a lot, both on and off.
Yeah, I agree. I've said what I think, so let's just keep an eye on it. I think he'll sign it, and I think that hopefully that announcement is made sooner rather than later. We'll be back on Thursday to preview the Newcastle game. So hopefully Dan can pull together the European Dream Tracker for Freitag and others, so we can have a look at that, just to kind of soothe a few fears. And Anna, Anna's been in the chat lately. You can never spam the chat, Anna. We like people to comment as much as they want to. You can dominate and chat as much as you like, but Anna thinks that we're more likely to beat Arsenal than Man City. I kind of agree with you, Anna. Actually, I think that's pretty true as well. We're going to wrap things up. Dan, anything quickly you want to say before we depart?
No, look, the main thing with these results, I think, expecting defeats, unfortunately, in some of these games, we just got to keep the spirit going. Like these, I don't think these next few games actually decide the season for us. We've got a really good end to the season in our run. So these games, just let's keep the spirit, let's keep some energy and momentum. Let's not treat each game like it's the end of the season.
Thank you very much, Danscape, for being with us tonight. Richard Spray over in Oklahoma. Still got most of your Sunday ahead of you, but any final thoughts before we depart?
Yeah, I agree with what Dan said. I mean, this same packet of games was happening earlier in the season as well, and we saw what happened there. I think we're in a better position to deal with it now than we probably were at that point, even though we were coming off of, I think, going unbeaten going into Arsenal, I think. So, or to Newcastle rather. So I still think we've shown the ability to kind of recenter ourselves, get back to what we do. And it's not just how we play, it's the execution, the individual performance levels. Because I think even though none of us want to see losses, that's not what we're looking for in any way, shape, or form. But I also say the thing that probably disappointed the most for me was just the fact that the performance level wasn't there. It was watching individual players that I know have been very consistently good all season long, not executing the way that we know they can. So that's the disappointing part more than anything, because as you've pointed out, this is going to happen. We're going to lose to Premier League teams because they're good, and they're a good Premier League team, Fulham. So they're what, 7th, I think, in the Premier League. So they've been really, really good this season, and so we can't just expect that it's going to go our way every single week. And I'm glad to just kind of calm down, decompress, and be ready, knowing where we are, as you pointed out, because no matter what we did this weekend, we were going to stay in 3rd. And so that's a good place to be.
Couple of things from me. I think when we were talking about those fixtures, maybe you were thinking about the Ipswich FA Cup fixture that's possibly.
Yeah, I read that wrong. Sorry.
So you just to clear that up, we have got the Ipswich FA Cup fixture after Arsenal, I think, and before Man City. But in terms of the Premier League games, it was what we said. Also, it's worth saying, look, Forest have shown bounce back ability this season. We shown that when we lost against Man City. We showed that when we lost 5-0 at Bournemouth. We bounced back with that big result against Brighton. And we've just lost yesterday, and it's about bouncing back. And hey, the other thing, Talking Reds, to remember is that we're still in the FA Cup and we're still 3rd in the Premier League. So it could be a lot worse. You could be a Man United fan. See you soon.
Come join Greg and Rich.